What is up, my podcast listeners and all my YouTube subscribers and watchers? I don't know what you want to be called, but my peeps on YouTube. And shout out again for everyone that has subscribed to my channel. Like, I'm really close to 250 subscribers, and you guys have been watching all of my stuff quite a bit, and I am really happy to see that you guys are enjoying my content. And another big shout out to Jason from RevFit for producing this t-shirt with my last name that's super long, and it was able to fit on the shirt, which I was surprised and stoked about, because you know what, it's been probably at least 2 or 3 years since I was on his podcast, actually promoting my first ebook, which, by the way, the Ironclad Body Training System Volume 2, even though that was 4 too, is on track for probably a late summer release. So keep an eye out for that. I'm super pumped. I'm in the editing stages right now, and it's a beast. It's over 100,000 words. Yeah, there's a lot to it. But speaking of YouTube, I started getting a lot of comments on my videos, and someone started mentioning about how to improve hip mobility. And if you watched my previous episodes, I kind of talked about hip pain in general and how to improve hip mobility. But for the sake of this episode, I'm going to go and show 3 mobility drills, 3, that people need to be doing on a daily basis, or at least like 2 to 3 times a week, to really actually influence change at a muscular level. Cellular level, not a muscular level. I don't know what I was talking about that. But to kind of put in some context. So if you are a gym goer, fitness enthusiast that, you know, you like go on YouTube and you watched like how to improve my hip mobility, and someone gives you a couple exercises and mobility drills and whatever it is, but that doesn't really actually change at a cellular level of how your hip is designed, moves, and everything like that. What it does do is prep your hips for exercises, and the exercise just, you know, kind of loosens the joint, lubricates it, and gets it prepped and ready for an exercise that you choose to do that day. And the biggest one is like any hip mobility drill, there's some sort of like hip opener, some sort of hip flexor stretch, there's some sort of like band that straps around your hip and you connect it to a fucking squat rack, and it like yanks your hip socket, and you get a deep like pigeon like stretch, and sure, like that will feel good in the moment, but it's not actually doing you any justice for long-term adaptability and change. So this is where the kin stretch principles go in, and this is where it kind of all stems from the comments that I got from a couple tutorial videos on hip flexion. And you know, looking back at that specific exercise, like I am working, what's it called? Hip external rotation with flexion. But I don't know, I could be wrong on this. I wouldn't spend that much time with hip flexion specifically if I had a goal of just improving overall hip mobility. I find that those hip flexors are kind of like already so yanked and tight. Getting into like hip flexion stuff, I haven't seen yet in my experience high payoff compared to focusing on hip internal rotation, external rotation, and hip extension. Those 3 are the ones that I usually attack first, and then kind of pepper in hip flexion specific stuff. So when you look at things like a barbell squat, squats in general, split squats, lunges, things like that, those 3 are very much needed in order to do that. So I tend to spend my time focusing on that. And I want to go over 3 specific exercises that I teach in my kin stretch and that I do specifically almost on a daily basis to ensure that I'm constantly influencing tissue change. So the whole kind of concept behind kin stretch, and I've done a whole episode on it, is that I am now inserting information at a cellular level to influence tissue change. Imagine that every day you wake up, you have all these muscle cells waiting for input, ready for some sort of input to create a reaction. If I choose to go sit in a desk for 10 hours that day, all those muscle cells go, well, you're sitting, you are not moving your hip at all. I'm going to just stay here and make shit tight to make you more efficient at sitting. So that's why people feel super fucking tight over a long period of time when they're at a desk job for years, right? Whereas if I decide to do my cars routine every single day, if I decide to do the 3 exercises I'm about to do and demonstrate on a daily basis, I'm constantly feeding information, because remember, like, cells react to different things, and specifically in this scenario, I'm talking about force. Force is going to be the isometric contractions that we're going to create in certain positions. And if I continually do that over and over and over again, those muscle cells are going to create more resilient tissue and more like smarter tissue, as I like to call it. And that allows you to create more change at a structural level with your ligaments and tendons and things like that, which will allow you to get more range of motion, but more importantly, more control in those ranges. So that's the biggest thing that I see value to kin stretch and the FRC principles, is that you gain control of your joint, your ligaments, your tendons, your muscles in those end ranges where most of the time injury occurs. So that being said, if we can continually influence at a cellular level for our tissue to be more resilient, we're literally building an ironclad body. We're building a bulletproof thing that we are in right now, our meat and bones. So then when we go to the gym, or we pick up our dog from the ground, or we pick up our kid, our body is resilient enough to withstand that external force. So without further ado, we are going to get into these 3 exercises that you should be doing every single day, or at least a couple times a week, to influence some serious change on those hips. So if you are just listening, I'm going to do my best job to really describe what I am doing. But I highly suggest you hit the show notes after this and get to the, probably by the time I'm finished talking about explaining this, the 9-minute mark of this episode to see the demonstrations. So I'm going to move my camera a little bit lower to get a better angle of what we're about to do. Alright, oh, my back just cracked, that's amazing. Okay, let's maybe just adjust this a little bit more. Okay, so I am going to be in a seated position with my legs super wide. I really hope these pants are gonna do me justice. So if I'm in a seated position, my legs are gonna be super wide, and from here I'm going to drop. I'm gonna go on a little angle so you don't have a full-on crotch shot the whole time. I'm gonna drop both legs over to my left side, and actually I'm gonna go this way. So on my left side, so this back leg, my knees in line with the hip, the knees in line with my ankle. My left leg's in front, my left ankle's in line with my knee's in line with my hip. Hence the 90-90 position. So we're going to stretch out our left hip into external rotation, and we're going to stay here a while. But the way we can get into external rotation a little bit more effectively is with my lumbar spine. I'm going to arch it and almost try to push my chest out, and like if I had a Superman logo, I'm trying to show it off to the whole world. I'm then going to use my hands to support, and I'm going to lean forward until I feel a deep stretch in that left glute slash hip. What I don't want to see is people rounding their back, kind of like if you were doing a pigeon stretch in yoga. You're going to be a little bit more upright. So the more I can tilt that pelvis and that arching that low back, I am literally opening up my pelvis to get more into the deep stuff of the hip, which we're trying to influence. So in this position, I am holding this for 2 minutes. The reason behind the 2-minute mark, and again, you can do 3, you can do 4, but 2 minutes is usually the special number that they figured out that at a cellular level, all the little stretch receptors are now shooting information back and forth, waiting for instruction. And that's what we were kind of talking about before, about how we're going to be able to influence tissue change. Those muscle cells are waiting for information, and we need to send some info with force. And how we're going to do that is we're in our end range. We are breathing deeply. I'm thinking belly breaths. Every inhale, I'm pushing against my thigh, and every exhale, I'm trying to hollow my diaphragm. We are going to create an isometric contraction on the outside of our joint. That being said, I'm going to think of driving my left ankle and left knee down into the ground as hard as possible. When I say that, I want you to think of going to your gym or picking up literally the heaviest object in your house or the heaviest weight in your house, but I want you to think that you're trying to lift, a 100-pound dumbbell. Your body's not going to be loosey-goosey to go pick it up. You're like, oh shit, it's 100 pounds. I need to make sure everything's tight, my core's on, and I'm going to pick that thing up. Same concept here. When I tell my people in Kinstretch to start driving down, a lot of times they're not pushing down hard enough because I can see in their face they're just it's calm and relaxed. It needs to be like you're breathing hard, you're irradiating as much pressure as possible to drive that leg down to create an isometric contraction. It's like if you had your car in with the e-brake on with a fucking 3,000 pounds inside it and you're trying to push it up a hill. You're using maximal effort to get there. That's what I want you to achieve. We're sending a signal to all those muscle cells. We're creating that isometric contraction. We're sending that force, that external force and load into the tissue itself. So I do this for 10 seconds. Another thing I do to kind of help people create tension is with their hands, they're pushing into the ground along with their leg. You do that for 10 seconds. You're going to let go, but you're not going to lean back like, oh shit, that was fucking hard. You're going to throw yourself further into the stretch. Because anytime you do an isometric contraction, you kind of communicate to your nervous system to take off that emergency brake a little bit, right? So you'll notice that after you finish that contraction, you let go, and you're like, oh, I can go a little bit further. From here, with your new acquired range, we're now going to do an isometric contraction on the opposite side of the hip. So we just did the outside, now we're going to do the inside. So when I tell people to go again, we're going to do something called a rails contraction, where we're driving our same left ankle and same left knee up towards the ceiling. And literally, it's not going to come off the ground, but you're going to do everything you got to lift that thing up. After trying to lift it, what I want you to think of, actually before that, what I want you to think of is try not to lean back. Because if I lean back here, I can lift this leg no problem. But if I'm constantly pushing my torso forward, arching that low back, and then try to lift, you're not going to go anywhere, but you're going to create a better contraction that's going to be worthwhile. So after the 10 seconds are up for both, so we do a 10-second contraction for pails, which is pushing down, and a 10-second contraction of rails to create that isometric contraction on both sides of the joint. Now, we've created all this change at a cellular level and at a nervous system level. We have this new range of motion. We need to reinforce that this is our new normal. That, we are going to challenge this new acquired range for our nervous system to remember that we have this amount of range of motion. So the next thing, and this is still part of the first exercise, I kind of layer this together. So what we just did was a 90-90 position for hip external rotation. with pails and rails. Now we're going to do an active range liftoff with this same leg. So we're going to challenge our hip external rotation actively. So from there, what I'm going to do is going to take my left ankle and think of lifting it up off the ground and then back down. If you're watching, you notice that my entire torso did not break apart. The only thing moving was my leg. I did not lean back, because again, if I lean back, poof, this guy can go up no problem, I can hang out here all day. But if I'm trying to stay upright in this 90-90 position and now try to lift, it's a lot harder. Now I'm working my true active range within hip external rotation. So I'll usually do like 5-second holds 5 times. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, where I hold the stretch for 2 minutes, pails contraction, rails contraction, and then the active range liftoffs. So we just covered hip external rotation. Freaking awesome, right? We're also going to do hip internal rotation, and this is where this stuff gets tricky. So I'm still in my 90-90. Say for argument's sake that, I flipped over, I did my other side, same thing, did my little 2-minute stretch, pails, rails contraction, 10 seconds. I did my liftoffs. Everything's great. Now we're going to do hip internal rotation. So if I now switched over sides, I have my right leg forward and my left leg back in my 90-90. Now to do hip internal rotation, I'm going to take my torso and rotate it over to my left leg in the back. This hip is already into internal rotation. I'm leaning further forward to get some stretch in this hip. What I see a lot is a lot of people feel uncomfortable because this is not a comfortable position. So a lot of times what I'll get people to do have less range of motion in their hips is they can stay back here and try to get their torso as straight as possible, or they find that position where they try to rotate as much as possible but keeping this nice and flat and then leaning in. So it's all kind of dependent on where you are with your mobility. Now if I am leaning forward, I am again holding for 2 minutes. After the 2 minutes is done, I'm going to do a pails contraction, and in this case I'm thinking about my left knee and left ankle again pushing down as hard as possible. And then after the 10 seconds are done, I'm going to try to get further into the stretch, and then I'm going to do a rails contraction, which is the opposite, where I'm driving my knee and ankle off the ground up towards the ceiling. Remember, it's not going to come off the ground. It'll only come off the ground if I lean so far back and it's like, oh, look at that, no problem. If I'm here, it's going to be really hard to lift, and that's what we want. We want to create an isometric contraction in this hip. And again, in this position, you can push your hands into the ground, or what I like to do is create fists and squeeze the crap out of my fists. Sometimes I'll have tennis balls, lacrosse balls, massage balls, whatever it is. Squeeze, 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 squeeze to create more tension. Now, we've done all this work, influenced the tissue, influenced our nervous system to give us a little bit more range. Just like the other side, where we did hip external rotation and we were doing active range liftoffs, we got to do active range liftoffs in hip internal rotation. So now I'm going to rotate my torso to face the right. And from here, when I tell people in my class to lift, what you're going to think about doing, keeping your left knee in contact with the ground, you're going to lift your back ankle, holding it there, and then back down. I always tell people, in kin stretch, when your hands are up here by your chest and torso, makes things hard. When your hands are placed down to the ground on both left and right side, a little bit easier. If I lean over to my right hand, a little bit easier. And then if I go into my elbow like a side plank, even easier. So I always tell people, you gotta find a position where when I tell you to lift, you're not like, oh my God, and I'm leaning forward to get more. And this is not where it is. You wanna be in this upright position. When I tell you to lift, boom, you're lifting into internal rotation actively. And again, 5-second holds, and that's going to do a lot of great things. What will happen, and I see this a lot, when people are new to kin stretch, to FRC, whatever it is, I see this in class all the time. I'll tell people, all right, lift, and then huge cramp in this outside of the hip people do this thing, they're like, oh my God, what the hell's going on? And essentially what that means is you're sending a signal to your body. And also, your brain's sending the signal to all the muscles involved in hip internal rotation actively. And they still don't really understand what the hell you're talking about. So they go, okay, well, I see that you want me to do something. It's not really coming out clear, so I'm gonna cramp, and hopefully that's what you want. It's not what we want, but that's kind of like a neurological, I guess, response, and you gotta fight through it. Like a lot of times, you know, you have to practice, and it's kind of the, what's it called? The lane or the pathway to actually having full control over your body. Now we just did hip external rotation, hip internal rotation, and now we gotta do hip extension. So again, remember, hip extension is anytime you extend your hip. So things like deadlifts, glute bridges, running, sprinting, all require adequate hip extension. And if you're doing lunges, you're putting your hip into extension. A lot of times people feel super tight on the backside of their thighs, so their quads, their hip flexors. So in this case, you want to work hip extension with pails and rails. So one of my favorite ways of doing this, and because my floor is a little bit, well, not the floor, but the space that I have is a little bit hard on the knee, I highly recommend that you have a mat or something for your knee. So essentially what we're going to do, and hopefully I have enough room here, I'm going to have my right knee down and left leg forward, kind of like a hip flexor stretch, but we're not going to just do a hip flexor stretch. What we're going to do in this position, we're almost going to go into a runner's pose. And I want this back knee to be as, well, my pants are tight. If I don't rip these. So I'm going to try to get my leg into almost like a runner's pose. And I'm literally just pushing my hip down. So in this position, I am working hip extension. I'm going to hold this for 2 minutes, just like the other two. After the 2 minutes, I'm going to create a Pales contraction where I'm going to push my knee into the ground. But how I'm going to do that is I'm going to drive my heel up towards my bum. And now I'm going to think of driving this knee forward into the ground as hard as possible. I'm squeezing my ass as hard as possible. Hold, 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 hold. And from there, I'm going to dip down a little bit further because I just communicated to my nervous system. And then my rails, I'm going to think of taking my heel up towards the ceiling and trying to get my knee off the mat. But it's not going to come off the mat. But again, we are trying to create an isometric contraction. So if I try to do that right now, you can almost see like my glute turns on and I'm trying to drive it up. And this is really freaking hard, but this is how I'm getting that isometric contraction for all my hip extenders. I'm holding, I'm holding, I'm holding, and I'm relaxing. Now, we just did a lot of great stuff for hip extension, and now I need to challenge it. So, a great way to do that is I'm going to be lying down in a prone position. I think you guys can still see me. Both my hands are going to go on top of each other, and I know it's kind of got out of the frame, but it's more so to see my legs doing the work. So my forehead's going to be down. I'm going to take my right heel, because that's the one that I just worked on. I'm going to think of squeezing my glute first and going into hip extension. So again, my forehead's going to be down, and I'm just holding this isometrically. Hold, 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 and then back down. What I don't want to see, and this is how people cheat, is they'll lift, but they open up their hip to get more. You want to think of having the two bony parts of your pelvis pushing down into the ground, and then you're just working on hip extension. What I don't want to see is the knee bend. You want to keep it nice and straight, and you're squeezing, 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 hold, back down. Squeezing, 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 hold, back down. So now we just challenged our new acquired range for hip extension. So, little note on that guy, because I see this a lot in my kin stretch and even my clients that I train. When people have terrible glutes, just that don't fire or turn on or activate, they'll tend to feel it in their hamstring and low back. What that tells me is that their body just doesn't understand how to extend the hip through the glute. A lot of it, I just tell people, like, slow down, think with your brain that, okay, I need to squeeze my ass. I need to squeeze my ass, and now I'm going to lift my heel up. And a lot of times it's learning how to make that brain and muscle connection, and it does take time. Sometimes I'll tell people to like lift up, hold it for like 10 seconds, because sometimes the longer it is, you have more time for your brain and muscles to kind of figure out what the hell's going on. And over time it will improve. But sometimes it just doesn't work and you need to throw in a different exercise. But for the sake of this video, because we're almost reaching 30 minutes, I'm gonna keep it with those three. So we have hip external rotation, and then for pails and rails, and then we have those active range liftoffs. We have our hip internal rotation, and then we have those hip internal rotation active range liftoffs. Then we had our hip extension, pails and rails, and then we had the prone hip extension active range liftoffs. So that being said, if you did this like once a day, so all that time, right, you have 3 exercises, 2 minutes each, and the active range liftoffs, this will take less than 10 minutes. If you did this every single day, once a day, guaranteed in 3 months, you're going to see a huge difference in your squat, in your running, in your lunging, in like anything that deals with hips. Like, sometimes people just don't want to put in the effort, and this is like you gotta grind it out over and over and over again. And these are the ones that I use in my classes all the time, and people already say, like, that are consistent once a week, that after a month they're like, yeah, my hips feel awesome, my shoulders feel awesome, because we're also doing shoulder things in there, but primarily like hips is the epicenter of our bodies. It requires a lot of mobility and movement, and you know, if we constantly focus on those 3 kind of positions and variations of those positions, hip mobility is taken care of. So I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully that was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and in the comments, like on YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube, like, write a comment. I will respond back and give you some feedback, give you some other exercises that could help. But these 3 are like prime, like this is what you need. So all those people listening, hit the show notes to watch this, and also make sure you subscribe to my channel, because I post a lot of stuff, and I'm going to be, probably by next weekend, I have, I think, close to 100 tutorials that I need to film, and I'm going to be uploading those a lot in the next upcoming months, because I need them for my ebook. So look out for that. Hit the show notes as well. Add me on Facebook and Instagram, because again, I post a lot of videos, a lot of photos that you need to be able to see, not just listen to my podcast. And again, share my podcast with friends and family. I feel like I haven't said that in a while. And also make sure that you give me a 5-star review for my podcast so they can reach more people. And again, guys, thank you so much for supporting me. Like, it's been 4 freaking years on this. I'm almost at 500,000 listens on my podcast, which is super cool. And just thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. You guys are amazing. Until next time, I'm going to continue giving you the best fitness advice out there, and you guys just fucking crush it. You guys are amazing. I love you all. Till next time. All right. Okay. Are we recording? Yes, we are. Cheers. Welcome to the show, you guys, to another episode of Cut the Shit, Get Fit. I'm your host, Rafał Matuszewski, and joining me today, kind of for the first time, in a sense of like this is your first interview on my show, the one and only Angel Santos. Say hello.
Hi guys. Happy to be here.
This show is going to be a really special one because number one, we're drinking beer, which I've never done on a show, so that's pretty cool.
Good to know.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, am I recording this properly? Yes, I am. Okay. That looks weird. Ever since I updated my laptop, everything is a little bit different and it just looks off, but it's all good. I think we're good. Anyway, for those who don't know, my wife and I are huge fans of alcoholic beverages. We kind of make it I would say a priority for every weekend to either have like a beer that we haven't had before, go to a brewery, try out some local craft beer, or, you know, try different imported beers from Europe to see what they're doing. And, you know, Germany kind of knows what they're doing with their beers. Or we kind of go down the path of like, let's make some fancy drinks like Manhattans and Mai Tais and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of one of our hobbies. So we thought we would bring it to the show today. And I'm going to try not to talk as much as possible because you're going to be the guest of honor on this show.
We'll see how that works out.
To start things off, we're going to make this really easy for you. We'll do some I'm going to lob some questions to make it easy. What is the current TV show you're watching? You don't have to say what we're watching because obviously
just me by myself.
Yeah.
I am currently watching the latest season that they have on Netflix for Grey's Anatomy. It's just insane. The stories, sometimes the reason I'm saying I'm rewatching is because I had to stop because it's so crazy, but I don't know, I kind of like watching it. I like seeing people wearing their scrubs and doing their things to help people. It makes me feel like that's the next step for me, even though that's going to be completely different and there's going to be no crazy airplane crashes or buses driving into the emergency room where I'm going to be working, because clearly that's not going to be me, but it makes me feel like that can be something I can look forward to, kind of. So yeah.
But it's funny that you brought that up because it's I can't remember if I was watching it with you or if I was just near you while watching it, but I remember there was an episode where one of the main characters was driving to the airport. He saw a car accident, tried to save the people in the car accident, and then he got hit by another car or something.
Yeah.
It just kind of kept going, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
It's so dramatic.
That's actually, that was one of the main characters that left.
Yeah. Okay.
But no spoilers for anyone who hasn't watched it.
Another good question is, I usually ask what, you're going to be doing this weekend, but we're kind of living the weekend.
Yeah.
So let's maybe kind of backtrack of what we did yesterday and what we did this morning that was super spontaneous that we never do.
Just to preface, Raph and I are really bad at being spontaneous. We try, but I'm a really big planner. Raph has somewhat molded into that as well, and so whenever we try to be spontaneous, it never really works out. But yesterday, man, yesterday was really good.
Yeah.
Why do you think it was?
There was in the morning I walked Misty, our dog, and right on the front steps of our place there was a dead crow, and I think there's some sort of superstitious
It was weird
thing.
because when he told me that, I was like, oh my god, is that a bad omen? Are we just gonna have bad luck all day? But
I guess it reversed for us, and we tried to be spontaneous yesterday, and it worked out so well.
So beautifully.
Because we've had things where we're like, you know what, we need to be more spontaneous. Let's go do this thing, and it never works out, and it's just like, let's just go home.
Yeah.
So tell the audience what we did yesterday.
Well, yesterday we had plans to go meet up with Raf's aunt and uncle, and we were going to go to this new brewery out here in Langley. So we met up with them, and it just so happened that they were telling us that they just recently purchased this like new like inflatable like paddleboard / like kayak that they can use, and we're like, oh, that's so cool. And then I saw the opportunity. I was like, maybe one day we can like hang out and like do things with you and like bring our dog, because like we've never had Missy out on the out in the water. We don't know what it's like. And I like planted the seed, and it worked. They were like, yeah, we should do it today, and like we did it. And then at like 7 p.m., like right where the sunset was coming, like we were out on the water like paddleboarding, and I had Misty out on the water as well, and she was scared, but she was like, but she liked it. Like she came back for a second time. Mm-hmm. And then we went out for Indian food after. It was just perfect. It was good.
And then like this morning, out of nowhere, we were like thinking of, last night we were thinking about, okay, maybe we should get like kayaks and paddle boards, but we're like, realistically, how often would we do it? And like, should we like quit while we were ahead with this whole like spontaneous thing? So we were like, maybe we should get bikes. And then out of nowhere this morning we go and buy 2 mountain bikes. So now we have mountain bikes. So here we are. We are.
But we said we should quit while we're ahead. We shouldn't push our luck.
Yeah. So I feel like we can talk about random stuff all the time. And I think what we need to get into, the reason why I brought you on the show is because you are now in your 4th year of naturopathic medicine. You're going to become a naturopathic doctor.
Really soon.
And for those people who do not live in BC or just in the West Coast that know what a naturopathic doctor is, what they do, and all that fun jazz compared to like the East Coast and maybe, I don't know, in the UK it's probably not as popular. So we're going to kind of backtrack to the moment that you finished your first undergrad and you were like, I want to become a doctor, don't know which route I'm going to go. Yeah. So let's maybe start there of why you decided to go down the route of naturopathic medicine. Boom!
This is not really, like, I used to think that this was a heavy hitter question, but it isn't anymore. Like, I was definitely having to think and choose between going like the traditional allopathic medicine route, and I didn't even know about naturopathic medicine really because I didn't grow up with it at all. And so we had 2 our friends who graduated from there. I asked them about it, and I was like really intrigued because like in naturopathic medicine, I was like, this is so different from what I know medicine to be. And so I just kind of did more research. Like I attended some of the like student for a day sessions that they had at the school out in New West, and I just read more and more, and just kind of like fell into place. Like it just made sense as to what, like how I would like to practice and how I'd like to treat people, and it was kind of a no-brainer. Like it was a struggle figuring out like, is this what I want to do? Like, you know, but once I got in there, once I signed up, everything just fell into pieces, and it was great.
Yeah, I think you're kind of selling yourself short in a sense of like, there was so much back and forth of like,
oh totally, do
I want to become a medical doctor? Do I want to become a naturopathic doctor? And it was just like literally back and forth.
It was, like I said, it was a struggle, like going back and forth. At one point, early in my like decision making, I was like, you know what? Okay. And this might sound really vain, but like, people don't know. Maybe people don't know what a naturopathic doctor is, and maybe I'll be like, maybe I should just go become like a regular medical doctor. I'll just do it. I was like, I'll study for MCATs, do what I need to do. But it didn't really feel right. It didn't sit well with me. It was more just like, it's easier for people to understand, but it's just like, why am I thinking about what other people care about or whatever. And so I was just like, yeah. But honestly, my favorite part of this telling the story was like when I took the student for a day, I attended a class, botanical medicine, and learning about some of the herb names. It was like, oh my god, this is like as if we were in Harry Potter and learning all of the herbs. And like, it was so cool. And I was like, this has to be it. So it was like small little moments like that where it's like, this is awesome. This is so cool. And like, yeah, it just made sense.
Yeah. So I'm going to shelf that Harry Potter thing because we're both huge geeks on that. But I wanted to bring up what you said was like, you almost chose the harder direction because you knew that a lot of people wouldn't know what it is.
Yeah.
It's not really the traditional route because a lot of people where, you know, if they decide to go to the medical profession, it's kind of like, I'm going to become a doctor. Like, that's like cream of the crop. Like, that's what I'm going to do. But you're also limited as a general practitioner of what you can do. Yeah. So you almost challenge yourself even more.
Totally.
Because the naturopathic profession is always kind of like under fire, like some people don't believe it's real, whatever it is, but you chose the harder route. And I think for the audience listening or watching, we always have those situations where we're at a crossroads of like, what path do I choose? And a lot of times people kind of look at, okay, what's going to be the easiest route for me? Because like, you know, if you went with a medical doctor, became a general practitioner, you can literally just walk into a full load of patients, make tons of money, boom, done. But as a naturopathic doctor, you literally are a practitioner like a physio or a chiro where you basically have to learn how to build a business, build your own patient load, market yourself, X, Y, and Z. Like there's a lot more to it. And I think a lot of people tend to like when they get to that crossroads, they want to like go on the easier route and then eventually figure out that, you know, if I actually went with my initial thought and like intuition, I'd be a lot more happier. And like, again, we're gonna try to bring this all together full circle of like why this is related to health. But I think when it comes to career stuff, a lot of people always kind of look for comfort, but we don't grow as human beings unless we're a little bit uncomfortable and getting out of our comfort zone. But I don't know where I'm going with this.
But you know what, honestly, like that's really funny because before I even decided I wanted to become a doctor, do you remember I had a sit down with you and I was like, what am I gonna do? Like I'm in the middle of my undergrad. Like I had an idea of like, okay, I want to be a teacher, but like it wasn't quite enough. And we had a conversation and I was like, you asked me, well, what do you really want to do? I was like, whatever. I want to be a doctor because that's awesome. That's the best thing that I can do. But I can't be a doctor. I'm not smart enough. I can't do it. It takes too long to do it. I'm already like, I don't even remember what age I was. I was like, I'm too old to start now, and I'll be too old by the time I finished. And what are we gonna have? You know what I mean? Like those are the things that came up. But then I really appreciate because you kind of pushed me out of my comfort zone because I was like, oh, I'll just be a teacher. It should be fine. I'll just do this. And like, while that would have been a fulfilling career, it's almost like I would have settled. And like, you're the one that pushed me out of that comfort zone. You're like, yeah, you just do it. And so I have to thank you, honestly. I don't know if I think we've had this conversation before, but I credit all of this to you pushing me out, honestly, pushing me out of my comfort zone. Because I am really the girl to sit in my comfort zone. I really like the things that I like the things that I know. And you're the one that was like, you should try this. And I did. And look at where I am.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are kind of like that. It's like if they don't have somebody influencing them to kind of get out of their comfort zone, they're going to just stay complacent or whatever it is. But I've seen like even in my industry where people will be in the same career for 20 years, absolutely hate it, and out of nowhere they're like, you know what, I go to the gym every day. I love training. I love like meeting people at the gym. I'm going to become a trainer. They go full 360, well, 180 to flip around, and just change careers out of nowhere. And like, worst case scenario, like if you have such like a lofty goal that's so high up there, like go for it. Because the worst that happens is like you don't make it and realize maybe I'm not cut out for it, but then you at least don't live with like, what if I decided to do that? What if? And I literally had this conversation with somebody a couple days ago, trying to figure out what they want to do with the rest of their life, and they were kind of like leaning towards the easier route. But I'm like, say you go down that easier route and you're there, you accomplish whatever it is, but now you always have in the back of your head like, what if I decided to do the harder route, right? So yeah, I don't know.
You need friction in your life.
Yeah, 100%. Next question is going to be like, for a lot of people, because I have people all over the world listening to my podcast where maybe naturopathic medicine is not that known. So maybe kind of give the Cliff Notes version of like, what is naturopathic medicine?
This is a heavy hitter one for sure. Naturopathic medicine, well, how I see it, because I have to look at it from my point of view, right, is it gives people so many different options on how to work with their bodies and promote their health. Because, and again, and I hate that it always compares to like a naturopathic doctor versus like an allopathic medical doctor, but it kind of like, but that's what people know, right? So if you compare the two, they're the same, but like a general practitioner, they're the same, but we just have more tools that we can use. We have botanical medicine using herbs, which is kind of similar to what Big Pharma uses for their synthetic medicine or drug prescriptions anyway. So we use herbs that are natural, but that doesn't mean that it's safe. It can still be toxic and stuff like that. So we learn about that. So there's botanical medicine. We have traditional Chinese medicine, which is like it's just like a whole nother thing. We just, like, us as naturopathic doctors, like, we know just the tip of the iceberg of traditional Chinese medicine. We know acupuncture. We can do moxa, cupping. We can do like some like diagnosis like of the like different like organ systems and the meridians, but like, oh my gosh, that's just a whole nother thing. And so which is really cool and something that I would like to learn more about, like pulse diagnosis, tongue diagnosis, like those are so cool, but like it just takes time and practice. And so it's something that we are continually learning, even now that I'm a clinician. But so yeah, we have traditional Chinese medicine that we have in our arsenal. We have naturopathic manipulation, which is basically like being a chiro, like all those mobilizations and adjustments that we learn. We have nutrition, which is kind of like what we're mainly known for. We can use, what else? I mean, we have counseling, which is also amazing. Like, we have the time to be able to sit with our patients, and like sometimes you don't need to just give them like something to treat like their symptoms. It's more just like, do you need to talk? Like, get it out there. And sometimes half of it is that it's just mental, emotional stuff that needs to be let out. And so that's why I think, like, that's why I fell in love with naturopathic medicine. It's like we have so many options that we can give our patients, other than just, you know, giving them the smallest thing. Like, I mean, this is the worst example, and I hate to do this because that's not all like that general practitioners do. Like, they don't just give prescription, but sometimes they're limited to that. Like, that's because they only have the small amount of time to see their patients, and they hear what the symptom is and they just give that. Whereas like, we have a little bit more time and we want to figure out what is causing the symptom versus how can we get rid of the symptom, because that's not it. That's just a band-aid. We want to fix, we want to help. We don't cure, because we don't cure. Your body can do that. We just help the body and we just nudge it along to help cure, like figure it out itself. Like, and it can do that. So that's why it's so cool. Like, honestly, I can talk all about it, and it's like all the things that we can do. It's just so many cool things. It's just cool. I think I nerd out about it. It's just like, it's so cool what all the small things, small and big things that we can do.
Yeah.
It's amazing. We have so many options.
So that's, like, I'm really happy that you kind of brought up all the little different things that you're able to do, because a lot of times, even when I chat with my clients and patients of like what you're learning in school, they have no idea that naturopathic students get to learn those things. So like you brought up like naturopathic manipulations, like chiro adjustments, like most people don't know that you can do that, at least here in BC. I don't know if other provinces or other states or wherever an ND works, but like for the longest time when you were learning them, like our coffee table was a chiro table, and it's like let's practice over and over again, and like that's freaking cool. But most, like at least NDs here in this area, don't really use that skill set. But it's like, you can find an ND that does that, and you get some musculoskeletal treatment, and that's pretty freaking cool that you get to learn that. And like acupuncture, like that's pretty cool to be able to do that. And again, I've been a guinea pig. It's good and bad at the same time. Like
it's good.
It is good, but maybe let's talk about a little bit about what kind of acupuncture you do, because like again on my show we've talked about IMS, traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, but like maybe talk about the difference between IMS and...
To be really honest with you, I don't know what IMS. From my understanding, from what we learned, IMS is similar to what we do, but I haven't gone that route of like finding the differences. But like for us, what we learn about the different organ systems. So like for example, we have like the TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, like lung organ, and that is corresponded with a meridian. And so if we find that, and each meridian and each point in the meridian, because there's like over 300 points, each point can be like, it could be a local point. So like if there's a point, like for example, the easiest, the very first one that we learned is large intestine 11, and that's the first point that we needled, which is in the corner and the elbow. And it's like, okay, well, you can use that point if you have like just locally, if you have elbow pain, whatever. But then you can also use that point to clear heat in the body, which is like, that doesn't make that, like if I said that to you, you'd be like, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
But like, it's just, it has all these different meanings, and then you look at, based on that meridian, you look at the actual organ, what is it, what is the job of that organ. And say if you talk about like large intestine, the TCM large intestine, it's the organ that is in charge of letting go. So if you have a lot of things that are built up, or like like emotionally, mentally, even like physically, use that point. Maybe not specifically that point, but like if you target points along that meridian, that'll help you to let go, whatever that means to you. And like, doesn't that sound kind of crazy? But it's also so cool, and you just dive more into it. And anyway, but like what I'm trying to say is like, it's not just like, okay, from my understanding, IMS, you target a muscle and you like stimulate that muscle. We can do that too. Like there are points in large muscles in the body that you can trigger specific points. You don't even need to follow the meridian. You can just do ashi points, where just like you feel around and you ask the patient like, hey, is this like tender there? And they say yes, and that's where you needle. So it's kind of like a trigger point as well. So like there's a very big overlap, but I think it's more just like philosophically, what does it mean? That's what's different. But I've never looked into IMS, which I am curious about it, because it sounds very similar, but we target meridian points versus IMS is just, I don't know.
But the one thing I wanted to get into is like the, I guess, energy component of acupuncture and how that relates to where the meridians lie and things like that. But again, like, correct me if I'm wrong, like the yin and yang type of thing, but there's a different way to pronounce it properly than like Westerners do.
Yin and yang.
There you go. But I did have someone on my show, and I feel totally bad that I can't remember his name, but I literally probably interviewed him 3 years ago, and he's one of those people where I think he has like 2 PhDs, a couple master degrees, and he's one of those people that kind of looks at all these different things related to our health and sees if they actually work. And he went on this like rabbit hole of like, okay, TCM, meridian lines, like, is it bullshit? What's going on there? And he found a device where it will pick up like electrical like currents and things like that. And he did like a little self experiment with other people and things like that, where they would follow the traditional like TCM meridian lines with this device that will basically have like a needle where it'll stay at 0 if there's no like electrical current, and then the moment it hits it, it's like boom out of nowhere. And every time they went over a meridian of every like TCM point, it just like the needle like skipped like crazy. And he was like, all right, so I guess we're like onto something, which is like pretty cool, because like I think that whole like traditional Chinese medicine is based more on like energy stuff.
Totally, it is energy healing.
Whereas like in the Western medicine, it's like that's kind of woo woo for me.
Right?
Yeah.
I know. For me, like woo woo is like there has to be a reason why it's been going on for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And it's been helping all these people. So, like, yeah, sure, it's woo woo to you, and people are all about like, you know, evidence based and all that stuff, and there's no research. But sometimes it's like, well, if you look at someone and you do this and it helps them, that's your proof right there. Yeah. If somebody feels better from a treatment, I'm not going to be like, well, research said that it doesn't actually help you, but so you're lying, or I don't know what it is. But like, you know what I mean? Like, so the whole thing is helping people. Yeah. And if it helps them, that's awesome. Yeah. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, it's like when people that I train, at least, like I get them to foam roll every time they come see me. And when people ask, like, what is it doing? And I'm like, honestly, it's not actually doing that much. But you get a response of, like, ooh, that thing is tight. And it feels pretty good going on it. Oh, shit, this is really tight and this is painful. But we do something to our nervous system where it creates, like, a change. And I always tell, like, clients that if you find something that makes you feel better, like, keep doing it. Like, even if research doesn't like support it. And I've had this like, because like at my clinic we do cupping all the time, and it works so well on nerves being entrapped or like whatever the case is, low back pain, amazing. And I remember doing a post like a couple of years ago, like when I first got certified in cupping, and I'm like, here's what we do in the clinic. And I literally had like an argument with a dude online saying that it actually doesn't work, not supported by research, blah, blah, blah. And it was like a back and forth, and I'm like, this guy's not going to back down. So I'm like, you know, thanks for contributing to the thing. But at the end of the day, if something makes someone feel better and they have like crippling chronic low back pain and we put a cup on them and they're like, wow, I feel so good and like the whole week is great. And I'm like, why would I want them to stop doing that? Like, you know, but I don't know, that's our world today.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's a huge issue. It's just like evidence-based versus there's a lot of things that you can't really do research on.
Yeah. But the other thing I wanted to get into that I think most people don't know that NDs can do is like injection therapies. And that's like a whole nother thing that you kind of haven't dove into, but like at least here in BC, because again, everywhere else is a little bit different, like you could get to a point where you're doing Presale injections, PRP, even Botox, even filler, even IV therapy. So maybe chat about like those options. Like I look really forward to like you being able to do IVs, because like I've had IVs in the past and I felt amazing after, but I don't know, let's maybe start with IV therapy and kind of go from there.
IV therapy, I mean, we can do them in clinic. We were certified in school, but to be able to do them outside of the school, we still have to do several other courses to do it. But I mean, the most well-known IV therapy is the mini Myers, which we were just like practicing on each other, and I was like, I loved doing it. Like I loved getting it. But my partner had a hard time getting a vein, so sometimes I didn't get it. So, but it was really fun. And so you have like the Myers cocktail, which is like magnesium, calcium, B vitamins, and it's just like an amazing thing that just boosts your energy. And there's other combinations. Now we're learning about the different ingredients that you can add in, but to be honest, we haven't gone into it yet because just we're still learning about it. And so like so far we can do IV therapy, and usually the Myers cocktail is just for kind of like boosting energy or boosting the immune system. It's very general, but most people are pretty deficient in most of these minerals. So you got like the B vitamins. I mean, unless you're not taking a complex, like a B complex, like you're pretty deficient, especially if you're not eating the vegetables that most people, I mean, most people are now, but like there's still people who are like, yeah, McDonald's is the only thing I'm gonna eat. And so like those people they would benefit from having a Myers cocktail. And you know, the vitamin C and magnesium and calcium, like those are great for you. And again, it could be lacking, and especially magnesium. People need magnesium so much. So yeah, I love IVs. I'm sorry, I don't remember what your question was.
Me either, but like I already realized that we're already past 30 minutes and we wanted to keep it under 30, but maybe one of the last questions would be, when should someone see a naturopathic doctor?
Before they start feeling something. I would say if you want to optimize your health, do it before you start feeling symptoms. But most people don't do that, right?
Yeah.
People will go to see a doctor when, not even right away when they start feeling something. It's more just like, oh, I've had this thing for 6 months. I thought maybe you should see it. But so like, while that's fine, that's great that you came in, it's better if you come in and optimize your health before. But again, not realistic. Not everyone can do that. You know, if you have we can treat any acute issues we can help with, but we are really good at chronic stuff. Things that are like long lasting, things that you're like, what is this? I don't know what it is. I went to my medical doctor. They don't know what it is. They just kind of brush it off saying it'll be fine or it'll go away on its own, but it hasn't gone away. That's what we're really good at. I feel like we're like detectives, and we will continually like look at every aspect of your life to figure out what is causing that one thing, or maybe not even one thing, like several things that's causing these symptoms coming up for you. So yeah, come in before you have issues, but even if it's after, I mean, it's like we can see you for anything.
Yeah, it's kind of like when we get people in the clinic to see our chiros, where it's like, my back is so fucked, I can't move, fix it. And then like after a couple treatments, like, I still feel pain, why isn't this working? It's like, well, you could probably have come in like beforehand to kind of like get some maintenance done, get some tissue change, maybe start exercising. Like those things can like prevent your entire back from exploding by picking up your sock and now you can't breathe and you're on the floor. So I kind of look at it the same way as like a naturopathic doctor is like, let's prevent you from getting like terrible heart disease or whatever it is. Yeah. Like it's preventative medicine, and like you said, even if it gets pretty bad, like there's other options other than constantly taking drugs or surgeries or whatever it is. And that's just like my profession. Like my hip hurts all the time, I'm gonna go get a hip replacement. It's like, well, let's like work on other things before we get to that point. But maybe for the last question, if people wanted to find you online, because I know you're on social media.
I am. I kind of feel a little bit embarrassed, but so I started off. So I'm in my 4th year now. In my first year, when I first started, I was like, I'm going to document every single thing, every single day that I'm in school, what I learned that day, or like the most important thing that I learned that day. And I did that up until 2nd year. And even the last like month of 2nd year was hard to get it through because it got harder and harder, of course. But so I've documented all of my 2nd year, like every day up to my 2nd year, and then for my 3rd year I'll just kind of wrap up like quick big things that I learned. But yeah, so you can find me at ND Student Santos. I almost forgot. ND Student Santos on Instagram.
Awesome.
That's my baby that I kind of neglected. But I will be taking the summer to kind of revamp it because I have a little bit more time now, thank God. But yeah.
Awesome. So thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and drink beer and answer random questions that I decided to ask you. That's it for this week's episode. I haven't had like guests on my show for a while, so this was awesome. So thank you. This was amazing, and let's cut it there. See ya.
Bye.
What's up, my podcast listeners? Welcome back to another episode of Cut the Shit, Get Fit. I'm your host, Rafal Majaszewski, and we are getting really, really close to my 400th episode. Fuck. That is crazy to me to think that I will be at that milestone really, really, really soon. And now I recently just got a brand new listener that reached out to me saying like, oh, I just like started listening to your first episode, and honestly that first episode is so bad. I was so nervous, and I apologize for anyone brand new listening to my show that went that far back to listen to my first episode. I promise it gets better. I promise. So before I get started today, we got to do some shout outs, because I am quite popular in the state of Texas right now. My first top 3 cities are all in Texas. So first city in Texas is Dallas, and then we have El Paso and Plano. Hopefully I said that correctly. But yeah, 3 cities in Texas. Shout out to everyone in Texas listening to my show. And number 4. I believe this might be the first time this country's ever been on my top 10. I'm pretty sure they've popped on like top 20 at least, but I'm gonna butcher this city's name, but Hero Word out of the Netherlands. I'm sorry. I'm totally terrible at pronouncing other cities from outside of Canada and the States, so I apologize. But yeah, shout out to everyone in the Netherlands listening to my show. Super, super cool. Alright, so I'm going to close this up. Topic for today, we are going to talk about foot and toe mobility and health and strength and all that fun stuff, because one, I did get a request to do this, and 2, literally right before I just started recording this, I posted a entire toe activation mobility series that I'm going to go over in this video, and also kind of talk about the importance of having adequate control over feet. So if you look at the design of our hands and feet, they're very, very identical. Very, very, very similar. Even bone structure, I believe, I can have this mixed up, and I think I said this on my show before, that it's either our hands or our foot. One of them has 26 bones, and the other one has 27. So they're very, very identical. So when it comes to these 2 joints in particular, they showcase a lot of similar traits, but the only difference is that we have our feet constantly covered by our socks and shoes almost all day. And if you're the typical person, when they come home, they don't typically go barefoot. They're in like slippers and socks or whatever else thing that you wear at home. And it's a shame, because we are, Dr. Andrew Espino would always say this, basically putting little casts on our feet, and you expect your feet to react the way that they're designed when you do something active, especially something like running that requires all those small little intricate muscles in the foot to function the way that they're designed. So imagine you taking your hands and putting like mittens on them, and then trying to go on your iPhone and try to like swipe left, right, and text, you wouldn't really get that far, and you don't have that tactile touch, right? So our hands exposed to our daily environment gets a lot of good feedback, and it can adapt to that feedback. Our feet don't really get that. And this whole topic of foot health and foot strengthening really will come down from the work of I always butcher her last name, and I've had her on my show, Dr. Emily Spickle. I'm pretty sure Spickle. She is literally the person that I've learned so much from. I was first exposed to her at a conference probably now 7 or 8 years ago, and it just blew my mind how much she knew about the foot. And she's actually a surgeon by trade, so she actually knows a lot about the foot when it comes to the surgery side. But then she also realized that every time she did a surgery to, like, say, fix a bunion or some other foot thing, she actually made the patient a lot worse down the road than actually better. And this whole idea of surgery, when it comes from like a biomechanical standpoint, again, this is my opinion and the opinions that I've heard from other fitness professionals that are more so on the rehab side, I can't speak today, that have seen patients post-op when it comes to these things, and they all kind of said the same thing, is like, a surgeon kind of looks at a problem like, okay, my door is not closing, I'm gonna shave off the door and now it closes. Whereas like a exercise physiologist, a physiotherapist, chiropractor that works with patients post-op or pre-op, whatever it is, they don't look at like, oh, the door's not closing, and they want to shave it off. I'm going to look at the hinges. Maybe there's something wrong there, and let's fix that problem instead, right? And a lot of times, surgery on these kind of things will lead to some improvement from like a pain standpoint of, like, say your pain out of 10 is a 7 and you get surgery and now you're down to a 5, but it's still there, right? It doesn't really take away the problem. And then say 10 years down the road, you're kind of back to square one and things are kind of worse, and maybe something else is bugging you now. And the foot is kind of one of those things. So, say you've been walking in a certain gait for your entire life, and now you have to get some sort of surgery on your foot because X, Y, and Z. Let's just not get into the different things out there you get surgery for. And then, pain goes away, your foot's awesome, but now you're getting like medial knee pain for some reason, and then your hip and low back hurts for some reason, all because of what happened down below in your foot or your toe, whatever it is. And that's what Dr. Emily Spickle, I'm just going to call her Dr. Emily from now on because I don't want to keep butchering her name if I'm doing it wrong. That's what she quickly realized, is that she was actually making her patients worse with these traditional surgeries for the foot. And then she kind of ventured in, like, okay, what are corrective exercises or a way to like rebuild the foot from the ground up. And she's now quite the educator in that realm, so I highly recommend you check her out, or even go to the episode, what's it called, within my podcast. It would have been like 2 years from now, like from this date, that I had her on my show. And then I had another surgeon for ankles, feet, and toes. Can't even remember his name now, because he actually reached out to me, which was pretty cool to have a surgeon reach out to me to get on the podcast, and he was really, really knowledgeable as well. Both are actually, funny enough, from New York. Yeah, interesting. Anyway, so that being said, the people that are listening, there's going to be a large portion of this episode where I'm going to showcase my foot and all the exercises that you should be doing. But let's get a little bit back into the structure and function of the foot. So when you think about it, when you walk, there is a series of events that has to happen at the foot in order for you to propel yourself forward. So if you think of a heel strike going first, a little bit of supination, meaning you're going to go to the outer portion of your foot, and then you're going to pronate down towards the big toe, and then you're going to push off the big toe to propel yourself forward. So it's almost like a heel out, in, down to push yourself over. Forward, sorry. And a lot of times when people don't have strong enough feet, they'll do weird things, like they'll like overly pronate or overly supinate, or they're flat-footed, whatever it is. And the big thing that people need to do is start training barefoot and start rebuilding their arch, rebuilding the small intrinsic muscles. And a guy way before his time, named Vladimir Yonda, who was a physiotherapist probably back, I want to say in the 50s or 60s, coined and created, I believe, this is how as far back as I could find, an exercise called short foot that would help rebuild the arch. And a lot of people out there will utilize this, or they've heard it, and a lot of physios, chiros use it too, and it's such a small little movement to rebuild. And like, I'm a type of person that, like, if there's a training concept, rehab concept, whatever it is, I want to go back to the source. I don't want to go to the person that's just re-irritating the information, because sometimes their take on it might be a little bit different from what the original person designed that for. And sometimes just the language or how they describe it from the very beginning kind of gives you a little bit more context, and you'll understand it. So when you think about going back to the source, is literally kind of like the best way to understand a concept, because a lot of times when people reiterate a message, it's kind of lost or kind of diluted a little bit. But long story short, Vladimir was way beyond his time. He understood the body quite well, and now you see a lot of physios and chiros utilizing his methods and principles and things like that when it comes to understanding the body. So it's super cool when you kind of go down that rabbit hole. But anyway, that being said, maybe we should actually start going into these exercises. So I'm going to tilt this guy down so you can see my foot. So short foot. If you look at my foot, the idea is to get this arch activated. So the big toe that's on the ground, you want to think of literally shoving it into this big joint. So you want to think of pulling like this, but this joint right here that's popping off the ground, like I can put my finger under it, should stick to the ground as hard as possible. So I'm literally just pulling in and down, pulling in and down. So when you see my next pull, you already see that arch activating. And relax. Pull, relax. It's a small little movement. And a lot of people have trouble trying to figure out how to do that without like curling their foot in like this. And what's funny about this little exercise, this little short foot that I'm doing over and over again, it's a small little thing, but if you put your fingers like on your arch underneath here and you start doing that, you can feel the small little intrinsic muscles contract. And the funny thing is, like, if you are a kettlebell person and you start doing swings, or if you watch someone doing swings barefoot and you watch their arch, every time they drive the kettlebell back and as they get to the top of their swing and they snap their hips, you see their arch literally fire up to root themselves into the ground. And I would classify a kettlebell swing as a way to build up your arch. And there's a reason why people in the kettlebell world utilize barefoot training, right? So it builds strong feet, and people miss that mark a lot, and we just need more stimulation of that foot. A lot of times when people try to, go down the barefoot craze, they kind of do too much too soon and then end up with more problems But if you look at kind of the progression, if someone were to start training barefoot, like the easiest thing is like in your warm-up, go barefoot, right? Don't just go the entire hour now barefoot training, because you're gonna fatigue those muscles, you're gonna make them worse, right? It's kind of similar to like, oh, I want to start running. You're not gonna go run a full marathon this weekend. You're going to like build up to it. Same thing with barefoot training, right? Like you can overly strain, you can do more damage than do more harm than good, right? So short foot is kind of the first progression I get people doing when trying to rebuild their arch. It's that small little pull. That is a great starting point, but then the other aspect to it, like depending on what you're dealing with, is just doing some soft tissue work, because sometimes what I find with people's feet is they're very, very, very stiff, and we haven't even really got up to the chain of like the ankle itself, but the bottom of your foot, and I'm literally showing my foot to the camera, like there's a lot of fascia and soft tissue in there before it gets into the bone. Like it's thick, it's really, really, really thick, and in order for that stuff to loosen up, one, you have to add some like movement for it to kind of reinforce to the nervous system that particular said tissue needs to move, right? It's the said principle, right? It adapts to a specific stress. So if I'm stressing my feet to move outside of their normal of being in a sock and shoe all day, then the little muscle cells that are in there that are responsible for movement are going to adapt to that stress. So that being said, literally getting a lacrosse ball, tennis ball, golf ball at the bottom of the foot just to start moving that tissue will help. If you went through like a standpoint of like rehab, like depending on how bad your feet are, you can get rock taped, you can get kinesio taped, same thing. Cupping can be done, you can do some instrument assisted, and you can literally get some like soft tissue work from a manual therapist to kind of move the process a little faster. But if you're not going down that route, then you have your short foot, you have your soft tissue, and we're going to get into the other exercises right now as well. I'm going to tilt this camera down. Now, if you look at my foot that's super white, sorry people at home, I'm blinding you right now. In my kin stretch class, I do this every single time. And actually another thing to note, if you look at my foot, there is a huge gap between my big toe and my rest of my toes. And that is a good inclination of balance. So if you look at chimpanzees, for example, or just monkeys in general, their feet are literally like my hand. So where my thumb is and where my fingers are, there's a huge separation. And that allows them to spread out more, to have more of a base of support. So then it can literally wrap around a branch, and now they have really, really good balance and stability, right? A lot of times people's feet, the big toe is kind of like smushed in like this against their other toe. And then you'll see already like this big knuckle here, a lot of people will get that bunion formed because they're wearing shoes that literally goes into this like triangle position and just scrunches up the feet together like this. And over time, like again, our body adapts to the stress you put on it. So if I'm wearing a shoe like this that's crushing my fingers together, and think about what I was just saying about how a step happens. You go on your heel, you're supposed to go down, out to the side, into the into pronation, and then the big toe pushes off for propulsion. Right, so if I have this all crumbed together like this, the only really way to do it, like it's really awkward to do it with my hand though, heel out and then pronate. So if I'm pronating with this kind of position of my toe in the shoe, like this is going to take up a lot of stress, and your body's going to build more calcium around that to protect that joint, and then boom, you formed a bunion, and eventually that's going to get super painful. But if you train your feet and you wear proper footwear, you're going to end up with space in between to give you more balance. If you look at gymnasts, they have the same same foot setup, or someone like in Cirque du Soleil, they have really good balance because they have good separation between the toe. But for the most part, everyone's big toe is kind of crushed like this, and then bunion forms. And that's really hard to do the exercises I'm about to show you if you're used to this like 8 to 12 hours a day, right? So in my kin stretch class, the simplest thing that I get people to do is like, okay, we're gonna lift our big toe up while the rests stay on the ground and back down. And it's literally just this one big toe going down and up, down and up, down and up. And you'd be surprised how many people can't do this, lifting just their big toe while the rest stay down and back down, right? So right away, when I see people not able to do this, I already know that their gait must be messed up because they can't actively control that big toe. And like if you think about it from the side view, that big toe, like look at how much activation I'm getting into my arch. Like that's a lot. And if that big toe can't move freely, then this arch is not going to be working the way it should. And now another variation from that is that the big toe stays up while the rests come up and back down, up, back down, up, back down. A lot of people have trouble moving the rest of their digits independently from that big toe. A lot of times when I see this, they bring up all their toes, but I physically want people to keep that big toe down and keep the rest of the toes going down and up, right? From there, my next progression is all the toes come up towards the ceiling and just the big toe goes down and then back up. Just the big toe goes down, back up. And then the next progression is all the toes again up towards the ceiling, but the rest of the digits, so like the pinky toe to that toe right beside the big toe, go down to the ground and back up, down to the ground, back up. Now, our feet should be pretty dexterous, and like the next progression that I work on quite a bit is having all the toes up and aiming for one toe to go to the ground at a time. Kind of like if I was on a piano with my toes, I'm trying to go pinky, next toe, the next toe, the next toe, and the big toe go last. Now, these movements or exercises should be quite simple for our feet, but you know, seeing this in action in my class, not a lot of people can do it, and some people can do 1 out of 4, and the rest are just terrible. They have a lot of trouble doing that. So now imagine if you don't have full control of your feet, they're kind of just there. They're not really doing anything for you. So now when it comes to any kind of stabilization on one leg, meaning single leg deadlifts, lunges, step ups, any single leg exercise, even think of deadlifts and squats, anything two-legged, running, walking, all those activities of your lower extremities are required to have full functioning feet and toe mobility, activation, everything. So if that's not working, something up the chain is going to compensate for it, aka your ankle, your knee, your hip, your low back, right? And a lot of times people will have those issues where like their knee hurts and they can't figure out why and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes it comes down to their feet, right? And we haven't really talked about the ankle because the ankle also influences a lot of movement too. So the big thing with having adequate feet is also that ankle. So we're going to get into ankles a little bit. So remember how I was talking about how the bottom of your foot has a lot of fascia and soft tissue, and it can get really, really stiff. Most likely, if that bottom of the foot is super stiff, the ankle is super, super stiff too. So I'm going to tilt this camera down and we can talk about ankle mobility. So if you look at my foot, man, my feet are so white and pale. I'm like Casper the Friendly Ghost here. The ankle itself, you need adequate, I'm going to tilt this up a little bit, adequate dorsiflexion, meaning I should be able to drive my knee as far forward as possible without my heel popping up in order for me to like squat, lunge, and things like that, walk, run, sprint adequately. But a lot of times if people have toe mobility issues, activation, the bottom of the foot is super tight, then all the fascia that comes in the back here and in the front that wraps around, it's also going to be tight. So a lot of times when I check people's feet, their ankle mobility is also super, super tight. So when I check dorsiflexion, it gets kind of stuck here. And most of those people will have some sort of deficiency when it comes to running, walking, whatever. So now I know that if I can fix the foot, it'll influence the ankle. If I influence the ankle, it's going to influence the foot. It's kind of like a yin and yang type of situation here. So sometimes all it is just working on ankle mobility exercises, ankle cars, pails and rails in this situation, rolling the crap out of like the soleus and gastroc of the back, because sometimes the calf is super tight. I think for the most part, a lot of people's calves are super tight and they need a lot of work. So sometimes it's just a soft tissue thing and more of like a neuromuscular control thing, because sometimes when people do those toe exercises I showed earlier in my class, sometimes it's like they can't connect their brain to their feet, and it's just kind of like waking shit up again. And that's why those little exercises work tenfold. And I've seen the progression because I've been doing Kinstretch at our gym for close to a year now. The people that have been really religious about it are now seeing the benefits. And I think it's those small little things that add up over time, and it's always the small things that people overlook. And it goes to show, just like anything in life, if you continually do the small things, they'll add up over time to a big thing, right? So I'm going to leave it at that. That's a lot of information. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Start doing your toe intrinsics. That's what they're called, toe intrinsic exercises. It's going to help a lot, and it might come in handy, you know? Next time you drop a pencil, pen, whatever, you pick it up with your feet. It'll be like that episode in The Office when Dwight was trying to practice 10 minutes a day with his feet to do everyday items and then spilled all the coffee on him. But let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out. Hit the show notes. If you're listening, hit the show notes to watch the video, because there's a lot of good demos, and or do the Cliff Notes cheat where you go to my post about the toes, and it'll help a lot. Thank you guys. Show notes again. Add me on Facebook and Instagram. I post a lot of video and photo stuff. I love you guys. Until next time. What's up, podcast listeners? It's your host, Profound Matuszewski, for another edition of the podcast and video thing that I've been doing and posting on my YouTube. And shout out to everyone who's been listening and subscribing. And once again, I'm going to say it over and over again. If you are listening, 100% hit the show notes and watch this video, because it's going to be quite visual, and I'm going to do some demos and also some exercise selection things that you can do at home before your workouts and your warm-ups, whatever it is, and also subscribe. So we're going to do some shout outs, because I always tend to forget, and hopefully my laptop works here. So 100% I am going to butcher this name, and I feel terrible, but I am one of those people that can't pronounce things, apparently. So really cool. The last 24 hours, this one city out in Mexico has been listening to my show 441 times. Oh, here I go. Tuxtla Gutierrez. 100% butchered that. I apologize. So anyone from Mexico, please reach out and let me know how to pronounce it correctly. And I've done that once before. It was like a city out in Sweden or someone, and someone actually on my Facebook reached out and just sent like a little voice clip and memo of how to pronounce it. So shout out to that person who did that, like, I don't know, a year ago. And then my number 2 most listened city, all the way in Colorado, the city of Boulder. And number 3, all the way in California, the city of San Francisco. So, funny enough that San Fran is my 3rd most listened city, because literally a year ago today, I was in San Fran for my functional release seminar, and it was literally the last conference thing that I've went to where you actually got to travel. And it's kind of surreal that this whole pandemic now is like reaching its 1-year milestone for many of us when it comes to looking back a year ago today. But anyway, onwards and upwards, as they say. What we're going to talk about today is knee pain, because honestly, I think as much as everyone would like to think that, they've done a good job trying to stay pain-free, we've all kind of experienced either some serious knee pain or just some knee pain that is annoying, and you've had to modify a lot of exercises and things like that. And I want to get into kind of like the anatomy of it, why it matters, common reasons why people get knee pain, and kind of wrap it all up with some suggestions and some exercise prescription and things like that. And I think probably the biggest thing when it comes to knee pain is figuring out why, because most likely it's going to happen again. And I think a lot of us who've gone to either a physio, chiro, massage, whatever it is, a lot of times when it comes to knee pain, they tend to treat just the knee itself. And again, like, that's a good thing to do to kind of lower inflammation and, like, the quality of the pain, so then when you leave the clinic you can actually walk and not feel completely destroyed. But there's usually an underlying issue that's got to look on the bigger picture. So in my industry, or I don't even know where I stole this saying from, but the knee joint is considered the stupid joint because it's usually dictated by the hip and the ankle. So usually when I see a patient or I have a client dealing with knee pain, right away I'm looking at how the hip and ankle move and the surrounding musculature, and then I also look at the knee itself, because the knee needs to be able to move, and I'm kind of explain why. So this is where the laptop is going to come super in handy, because again, I'm a huge visual learner, and when it comes to anatomy, me just saying muscles doesn't really help anyone. And I feel like a lot of times when people are at conferences or whatever, and people say out a muscle name, and everyone's just supposed to know what that is. But just like last time, I'm really hoping that you guys will be able to see this. So this guy right here, well, you can see the ring light. Oh, there you go. That looks better. So this is the sartorius muscle. So if you can see, I'm trying to get the ring out of there. Ooh, my laptop is super dirty. But you can see how the red line is kind of focused on where the muscle is. You can kind of see where it attaches from the hip to the knee. And the interesting thing about the sartorius, or the next muscles I'm going to be kind of talking about, is that the fact that they cross two joints. So it already shows how much influence now that this hip that may not be working the way it should is influencing the knee. So we already have one muscle that we're going to be talking about, and some other ones down the line, about how it influences our movement, right? So if you think about one giant muscle literally running from your hip all the way down to your knee, we already have kind of a clue of where to go. So now I'm thinking, okay, what other muscle out there in the hip / knee region would be also connected? So let's pull up the quadricep muscle. So again, stupid ring light. So the green, you can see how it's connected to our pelvis, and then it goes all the way down to the knee. Another great example. And I think for most of us, sitting at a desk all day, we can assume that those quads are quite tight. And if you are like anyone else out in the world, foam rolling, and you get to your quads, I think all of us go, oh shit, that's tight, ooh, that doesn't feel good. And then you wonder why a lot of people end up having knee pain. The other one that I want to bring up as well is the muscle called the Gracilis. So if you, again, you can see past my damn ring light. Pelvis, inside of the pelvis is basically an adductor. It goes across, again, inside towards the knee. So I've already brought up a bunch, well, 3 muscles so far, how they're connected to the knee. So now imagine those 3 muscles are not functioning the way they should. They might have some tightness, and that's in air quotes, and that's going to influence how the knee moves. So for example, if I know that my quads are super tight and I'm trying to do an exercise like a reverse lunge, and I actually want to demo that, so I'm going to move this guy and hopefully I don't mess anything up. So actually I'm going to make this go a little bit lower. Thank you for bearing with me. So we are looking at my right leg. If I know that my quad goes from the hip down over towards my knee, and I know that these guys are super tight because I'm in this position all day, and I go into a reverse lunge and all of this is now being stretched, and I go down into that reverse lunge, I'm going to start feeling that tightness going all the way down from my hip down towards my knee. So if I allow my muscle to, again, air quotes, stay tight, things like reverse lunges, jogging, running, like anything that requires you to do hip extension is probably not going to be the best feeling, and that knee is going to kind of take on a lot of that pressure. Now, if we think about the sartorius that goes from the hip across and then down into the inside of the knee, and we're also thinking about the gracilis that goes from the inside of our pelvis down into the inside of our knee, and we're trying to do, let's say, lateral lunges, lateral split squats, we're trying to play soccer, and all these guys are tight, and that allows our knee to flex and extend because it goes across this way. And this is one of the reasons why in my kin stretch class I do a lot of adductor work, because people just have no control over it. So actually a simple exercise that I tend to give a lot in my kin stretch classes for this specific reason, and I'm going to try to get this nice and low so you guys can see. So if I was in my 90-90 position with my left leg in front, really simply, all I get people to do in my kin stretch class is to demonstrate their active range when it comes to one, hip flexion, and adductor strength, actively lifting it up off the ground. So essentially all I tell people to do is to think of getting their left ankle, in this case, to lift off the ground and hold. And isometrically hold it without like leaning back, caving in, or anything like that, to get these guys stronger. And as we get this guy moving and grooving a little bit better, adding knee extension and flexion, because again, like the thing like the sartorius, the gracilis, they're all on the inside that cover our knee. Also our quad, again, goes from our hip down over onto our knee. So when it comes to the relation of these muscles that cover 2 joints, it's probably quite important to also demonstrate not only what they can singularly do just at the knee, but also at the hip. So in this case, I'm adding hip flexion. And now if I wanted to challenge those 3 muscles, it's also adding some knee extension and flexion to really focus on getting all those muscles actively moving through both joints. And anytime I throw this exercise or any other kind of variation utilizing those adductors and hip flexors that cross both joints, people have a really tough time with them. So now that kind of gets my brain kind of thinking like, okay, if people are having trouble with that, just lifting their own leg off the ground, when it comes to running, playing soccer, doing lunges, step-ups, back squats, deadlifts in the gym, something is going to have to give. And a lot of times it's the knee is going to take up the grunt of the work, and over time it's kind of like the straw that breaks the camel's back, and now I have soreness around the knee, and it might be most likely due to the hip. So other than the muscles that I've just kind of spoke about, there's other ones surrounding the knee that will influence how much movement you get, and it's usually all the muscles in your hip that focus on hip flexion. So hip flexion, again, if you don't remember from previous videos, is when I drive my leg up towards the ceiling, I'm doing hip flexion. So if you think about what we do on a daily basis and sit all day, all those hip flexors are going to end up getting quite tight. And when we have those hip flexors quite tight, it's going to influence how the pelvis moves, right? So if I'm trying to do any exercise that requires my lower body, and if I don't have adequate hip mobility, again, the knee kind of takes the grunt of the work, and it kind of sucks. So if you think about when I demonstrated hip cars, it kind of goes through all the ranges that a healthy hip can do. So if you look here, how I coach hip cars, I also add adduction right off the bat. So kind of similar to what we did here with the 90-90, as I'm driving my leg up, I'm going into adduction and external rotation, coming out of it, rotating around and behind. So in a healthy hip, all these ranges should be available with any kind of compensation. So when I do hip cars, you don't see anything else in my body move other than my hip. So going back and forth, I'm demonstrating what a healthy hip can do. So now imagine, the average Joe, where they sit all day and those ranges are not available to them. Again, the knee kind of takes the brunt of the work, or worse, also the low back. So usually if you find yourself in that pain category where you're trying to move and feel better, you usually have I would classify 3 things, but the most common ones are low back pain and knee pain, and then the third one usually is like shoulder pain, all due to what's happening at the hip, right? And if you think about it too, it's like the hip is designed to be a super mobile joint. The low back is supposed to be designed as a stable joint, and the knee as well is supposed to be designed as a stable joint. So if you have one joint in the middle between those, it's almost like a sandwich that's not doing its job. Now the low back and the knee have to make up for the lack of mobility through the hip. So now that we kind of looked at all the stuff that influences the hip, now we also have another kind of player to the game when it comes to knee pain, which is our ankle. So if you think about your ankle, it has quite a bit of different abilities to do certain movements. So if you think about, again, if you're lunging, walking, playing soccer, running, doing CrossFit, whatever it is, your ankles need some adequate ankle mobility. And if you can remember, hopefully you can see, ankles can either go into plantar flexion, so me pushing my toes straight, or dorsiflexion, driving my toes up towards my knee. So like a simple ankle mobility exercise is just me driving my front knee forward and back and kind of going through the range of ankle dorsiflexion. So now if you think about it, even how I'm sitting right now in a deep squat, 1, I need hip mobility to do that, and 2, I also need really good ankle mobility. If I don't have ankles that move adequately enough, just enough in order for me to squat, lunge, step up, whatever it is, again, that knee is going to take up all the work. And if you remember earlier, our knee is a stable joint and it wants to stay stable, but if it doesn't have hip mobility and ankle mobility, it's like a double whammy, and now you're dealing with a lot of shit. So looking at ankle mobility, simple things that you can do. 1, ankle cars to get some motion in there. And ankle cars, I've posted before, but I don't think I've ever brought it up on the show. So if I have my right leg in front and my left leg bent, left hand goes through, right hand holds left hand, and I start drawing big circles with my foot. And what's interesting too is when I bring this exercise in my Kinstretch classes, almost everyone is really good going here into plantar flexion or dorsiflexion, but when it comes to like going onto the inside or outside limits to kind of create that circle, it almost is like choppy and like it's not a smooth movement. Because when is the last time have you ever really moved your ankle to those kind of like, if you look at my hand being flat and that's your foot, going into a, you know, inversion or eversion position and adding like abduction and adduction movements. Like, I don't think we've ever really done it because we always walk straight and never into lateral positions to kind of develop that movement. So now when it comes to like squatting, lunging, things like that, if we already know that those outer limits going into inversion, eversion, we're not that, let's say, you know, adequate at moving in those ranges, again, that knee's gonna track in weird places and that can cause some pain. So like knee tracking, if you look at my knee, when I want to lunge or anything like that, it should kind of fall in line where my foot is pointing. And a lot of times when people don't have adequate ankle dorsiflexion where I can go forward, and like when I test ankle mobility in my assessment, the biggest thing is I get people in this half kneel position and just tell them, okay, to drive your knee as far forward as possible over your toe. And people with really good mobility is just like, yeah, sure, no problem. But a lot of times our body's really good at cheating movement. I always say this. And it's sometimes a good thing and sometimes a bad thing. So what I usually see, if I am in front of you, and I know I'm wearing all black and I should have worn different clothing, but a lot of times if you look at my fingers, this is going to be to represent my knee. People start going forward, and at your end range where your body goes, oh, you don't have enough ankle dorsiflexion, let me give it to you in a different way. So usually what happens, it comes forward and then the hip rotates out to give you more. So it's throwing you into almost internal rotation, and that becomes like a movement behavior. So every time you're required to get enough ankle dorsiflexion, whole body goes into this position, kind of giving you a false sense of ankle dorsiflexion. And a lot of times that is something called a valgus collapse, where the knee caves in. So if I was squatting, I didn't have one, adequate hip mobility or enough ankle dorsiflexion or mobility in general, stuff like this happens to get more depth. And just even a small little bit, because sometimes it's not both knees, it's usually just like the one, so I'm coming down in my squat and this will happen to get more. And over time, same problem, say I'm doing lunges, split squats, it's just like a small little thing where it constantly caves in, and you know, straw that breaks the camel's back, and now it's like, okay, the inside of my knee is really hurting. So kind of moving forward in the next bit, that's one of the most common things is people get pain on the inside of their knee due to that valgus collapse, because it's just a movement behavior that your body kind of learned to give you a false sense of mobility. Now the other most common kind of painful spot for a lot of people is on the outside of the knee. And again, that goes back to adequate hip mobility, enough ankle mobility, and usually what causes that, if you look at the anatomy of kind of the top of the quad, and let's actually, I think I have a good photo of that. Just hang on here. We're learning together, you know? This is great. Where is it? So, where are we? So this guy totally stole it from a different website, and you can see the copyright in the back, but if you look on this side right here, again, freaking ring light, and we look on the outside where we have our vastus lateralis muscle that kind of goes all underneath where the IT band is, and like, you know, everyone talks about like IT band syndrome. One, you rolling out your IT band over and over and over again is not going to fix your IT band syndrome, it's probably just gonna lessen the intensity, but that band is designed to be super, super, super tight. Like you can, I can't remember the number, but they've done a bunch of research where, you know, in order to loosen that IT band, like you almost need like 2,000 pounds of force per square inch to actually like loosen it up. So it's designed to be tight, but that doesn't mean that the muscles of your hip that run down to the outside of the knee, if all of these are super tight, then that's going to kind of pull on all this stuff, and even lightly touching the outside of the knee is going to hurt. So again, we're looking at hip mobility that's preventing you from doing certain exercises, certain movements that'll cause lateral knee pain. Now the other one, in my experience, not that common, but it does happen, is pain on the front side of the knee. And usually, again, quads can be super tight, causing the pain in here, but usually like the front of the knee stuff is due to kind of a sports injury. If you've had like an ACL sprain, tear, things like that, that causes quite a bit of discomfort and pain. Now, what are some maybe like knee friendly exercises? Because I get that question a lot. It's like, hey, if I've had knee pain forever, off and on, it's always been an issue, I've had my ACL reconstructed, whatever it is, right? So one, I kind of look at, okay, we need to have adequate hip mobility, adequate ankle mobility, and when those things are covered, now I'm looking at knee friendly exercises. So things like back squats, probably not going to be a good idea. Things like lunges, probably not going to be a good idea. Things like step ups, probably not going to be a good idea. So essentially anything that requires knee flexion is going to bug the knee like a bitch. Like think about all that muscular structure that we were talking about that kind of wraps around the knee. You bending it further, now you're lengthening all this tissue, it's not going to feel fucking great. So you're gonna have to find things that don't aggravate it. And when we do that, when we find exercises that don't aggravate the knee joint that's causing you pain, it gives it time to settle the fuck down, and then you can start working on other stuff to improve the function of the knee, which we'll get to pretty soon. So anyone that I have that has knee pain, we'll look for exercises that don't require a lot of knee flexion. So something as simple as glute bridges. So if you look at the nature of the glute bridge, like, yeah, I'm in knee flexion, but most people with knee pain can get into this position without any pain, and we're just doing bridges. We can do single leg glute bridges. We can do feet elevated on a box or a bench glute bridges. We can do hip thrusts. We can do single leg hip thrusts. And from there, if we wanted to get a little bit more fancy, single leg deadlift. Like that's going to be a huge player because one, it doesn't require a lot of knee flexion, doesn't require a lot of ankle dorsiflexion. So we're kind of on the clear there. Deadlifts in general are going to be great substitution. We can do hamstring curls with a stability ball. We can do glute bridges off the stability ball. Like anything that kind of just keeps the knee in one kind of locked position almost, when you think about any kind of bridge variation, tends to help a lot. Now, looking at the knee joint itself. So if you think about it, the knee joint does have movement itself. So there's something like your shin bone, so your tibia that runs down to your ankle up towards your knee. It's able to actually like move within your knee joint itself. So when I am in a seated position and I'm kind of about to do ankle cars like we were talking about before, we can teach and also assess if we have adequate tibial rotation in order to lunge, squat, run, or any lower body exercise. And when I have my Kinstretch classes, this is the thing that people struggle the most. So I've kind of, based on my own experience, realized that two things. Number one, most people don't have adequate control over their knee joint and adequate tibial rotation. And the other one is that people have limited tibial rotation, which throws a lot of things off when it comes to going to the gym. So what a knee car looks like is I drive my toes up towards my face. So now I'm locking out the ankle joint from any kind of movement, and it's going to be solely on just the knee joint itself. I'm also placing my hip into as much knee flexion as, hip flexion as much as possible to ensure that I'm only moving through the tibia. So if I rotate externally, I'm moving my tibia right now within the joint, and I go back and forth just like this, almost like a little window wiper, and I'm moving my tibia within my knee joint. And a lot of times, I wish I had a little sticky note, but if you think about it, if you look at my thumb, if I now rotate, now my thumb is out to the side, I rotate in, it's rotating in. So back and forth, I'm moving my tibia. Now, think about this position that I'm in right now. It looks very similar to what we do in a daily basis at the gym. So what exercise forces you to go into hip flexion and ankle dorsiflexion? Squats. So if you think about it from a standing position, I'm going into hip flexion and I'm needing ankle dorsiflexion. So what I'm actually doing is asking my body to get adequate tibial rotation. So what if, based on my experience again, in my kin stretch classes that basically everyone that attends, and they do get better over time, has no control of how this tibia moves, or they have limited tibial rotation, where's all the pressure going to go? It's probably going to go into your low back, and it's probably going to go into your knee over and over and over and over and over again when you're doing squats. And then on top of that, you've signed yourself up to a boot camp bullshit thing where you're doing squat jumps and burpees that all require adequate tibial rotation. So over and over and over, it's like a square peg in a round hole going through, and now you have knee pain. So really when it comes down to how to fix knee pain is finding exercises that don't flare it up, which we've already went over to, and getting adequate mobility through your ankle and your hip, which we've already went through, and finding control over your tibia and getting a little bit more range of motion. So, exercise prescription for all those things. Hip cars, which I already demoed, would be number one. Hip 90-90 for external rotation. Finding your end range, holding it for 2 minutes. At the top of 2 minutes, you're going to do pails and rails, meaning you're going to drive your ankle and knee down into the ground as hard as possible for 10 seconds. After the 10 seconds, you'll realize you'll be able to go a little bit further because you just spoke to your nervous system asking for more range. From there, the next thing is your rails. So you're going to ask your nervous system again for more range of motion by thinking of driving this leg up off the ground without leaning back. And then you're going to do the same thing on the other side. Then, for the ankles, you're going to go into a half kneeling position, get into your end range of ankle dorsiflexion. Pails and rails after the 2 minutes, and essentially what you're going to do for pails is you're going to be driving your toes down into the ground as hard as possible for 10 seconds, release, get a little bit further, and then rails will be your toes going up for 10 seconds. And then for tibial rotation, again, all of these have to be pain-free. If they're not pain-free, then you're not ready. You're going to be in a half kneeling position. And guess what? You're going to rotate your foot in, keeping your knee where it is. And now we have some rotation into internal rotation of our tibia. And then pails and rails will be trying to push your foot against your fingers. And then rails will be trying to coming off it without lifting up the heel. And then you can do the same thing the other way. Pails and rails here, pails and rails here. Those three for creating more range of motion, as well as ankle cars, knee cars, hip cars, finding exercises that are not required so much knee flexion like I'm in right now, this deep squat. And over time, it will get better. It's just being patient. And again, yes, you can layer on top some physical therapy, chiropractic, whatever it is, to kind of speed up the process. But a lot of times it's just finding what works, keeping at it for a very long time, and the knee pain will go away. again, the biggest thing when it comes to training around knee pain is to ensure you're not going through pain. And when pain is present, backing off and finding less range of motion within the exercise you're doing, eliminating the exercise completely, or something else. So, that being said, that was a lot of information. If you have any other questions based on knee pain or your knee pain specifically, let me know, and I'm happy to help. Hit the show notes, add me on Facebook and Instagram, subscribe to my YouTube channel. For all those who are listening right now, hit the show notes and watch this video. I do demonstrate quite a bit of stuff. And that's it for me. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to reach out. And that's it. Until next time. What's up, my podcast listeners? This is your host, Rafal Matuszewski, and this is going to be another presentation-styled episode. So for all my listeners, I highly recommend you watch this episode because we're going to get through a lot of different videos and kind of breaking stuff down. But if you prefer listening to me ramble about training and fitness stuff, then I'll try to be as descriptive as possible. What we're going to get into today is the kettlebell swing. And the reason why is because no matter how much I bring up or talk about or demonstrate the importance of doing a properly executed swing, I still see people just doing terrible swings where I want to pour like battery acid in my eyes. It's a little aggressive, but that's how I feel. I have done 2 episodes on the benefits of kettlebell training, which I might put together later on into one giant episode. So I might even combine this with that one. I don't know yet, or I'm going to do a separate one. But I'm excited today because I've done even some videos on proper deadlifting and things like that. But today we're actually going to break down like the start of how to kettlebell swing to the end, and I'll show you my entire progression of what I do with clients, because I think a lot of times when people want to do swings, or they just assume like, okay, I'm going to start swinging. But the issue with that is that you might not have the prerequisites or the movement kind of kinesthetic awareness in order to do so. And yes, my show is geared towards weight loss, but this is the stuff that other people don't think about, because kettlebell swings are probably one of the best exercises to create like a metabolic disturbance, so your body can burn calories, build muscle and burn fat, that whole shindig. And even for myself, the moment I change my training to kettlebells only, I get stronger and leaner really, really quick. Whereas if I put an emphasis on deadlifting heavy and only focus on deadlifts, I don't really get as lean, right? There is something to training with kettlebells that allows you to burn more calories. And in my other videos, I do explain that, the kettlebell becomes part of your body. It becomes part of your limbs. Like if you're holding onto a kettlebell, now you made your lever length longer, meaning the longer the lever length, the more energy it takes to control it. So an example that I give to clients all the time is like, if I hold a dumbbell here in a goblet position, I do squats, not too bad. But the moment I take that weight and start pushing it in front of me, it's like, oh, I need to stabilize more. I need to hold on to it more. Holy shit, it's really hard. And if I have my arms out straight, then I'm like, fuck, this is really challenging. So now imagine taking a object like a kettlebell and utilizing it where it elongates your lever for every single exercise. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of, energy that our body has to produce and utilize. And if you do that for all your workouts, like it's not like rocket science to figure that it's going to give you your most bang for your buck type of workout for fat loss and strength. So let's screen share, and hopefully every time I do this, I always have like no idea how to do it. Oh, here we go. Here we go. I need to put this down. So just like last time, I'm going to make myself a little bit bigger. I'm also going to, there we go. Okay, so when it comes to kettlebell swings, where do you even start? So the first thing, because I'm going to assume that everyone listening that is not doing swings right now, that moves pretty well, has probably skipped all these steps and just started swinging. And you may be at a position where if I asked you, do you know the difference between a hinge and a squat? You'd probably be able to answer as, you know, a squat is like when you squat. And then if I asked you what a hip hinge was, you would probably be like something to do with my hips. So already I know that your swing is probably not going to be the greatest. And I actually have a post going out tomorrow about deadlifting, if you should be deadlifting off the floor. And one of the questions is like, do you know the difference between a hip hinge and a squat? And most likely people can't give me an educated answer on it. And it's something that we need to understand. So one of the biggest mistakes is people squatting while swinging. Swinging is a complete hip hinge movement. And actually, what I want to see if I can do is show you some really, really, oh, look at that. And you can see that I was researching the benefits of elevated deadlifts. And funny enough, there is no article out there about elevated deadlifts. It's all about deficit deadlifts. But bad kettlebell swing form. There you go. I might not be able to find. Oh, maybe this guy. Maybe we'll start with this, but I'm gonna mute this. So there is something called an American swing where you go overhead, which I also don't like. So if you look at how the bell swings, so we're gonna go all over the place here. If you look at the American swing compared to the traditional hard style swing, so in the kettlebell world, there's a guy named Pavel who is from Russia that brought kettlebell training into America that made it very popular. So the Russian styled swing literally will just go to maybe shoulder height or maybe a little bit lower, whereas CrossFit created this thing called the American swing. The reason why I don't like it is, as you can see, as the bell is up top, as it comes down, you are now fighting gravity to drive it back. So a lot of times with an inexperienced person that may not have the best kinesthetic awareness, the best body movement or mechanics or some sort of mobility restriction, they're going to end up utilizing the lower back. Let's see if I can. I don't even know why this guy's turning his head now too. So see, like he has to actually now at this point slow down whatever bell this is. So imagine if you're using like a 24 kilo, that's 53 pounds that you have to slow down on the way down. Yep, still slowing it down. At this point, he should be already pushing his hips back. Now he kind of is. Now he's putting it down. I love how this is supposed to be a tutorial on how to do an American swing. I always find too when I watch videos of like CrossFit coaches, and we're gonna like watch this a little bit, but you can also see he doesn't even have that great overhead mobility too, which is another thing that you need in order to do this stupid exercise. Who would have thought that this episode was going to be just us tearing apart the freaking American swing, but I kind of like it. Come on, get to the... So look at how he actually swings his hips. It's kind of like a swoop with his knees. Okay, anyway, I was trying to look for a squat swing, because that was the original thing that... Ooh, I wonder if this is going to be it. I feel like we're watching like a live stream. Okay, this is also a terrible swing. And I'll just tell you why. There's like absolutely no power in that swing, but now she's doing some sort of... Okay, this is gonna be a lot harder than... Actually, funny enough, look at that. Pavel on Joe Rogan. So I actually had this saved in my to-dos to watch, but Pavel is like this popular that he got invited to Joe Rogan's show to talk about kettlebell training. So kind of side note, if you're interested in kettlebell training at all, 100% go and watch this episode. Okay, you know what? I'm not going to be able to find this for you guys, but we're going to have to shift gears here and... Guys, I thought I would be more prepared. Here we go. All right, so the biggest thing is people squat when they swing. If you squat when you swing, you won't be able to generate enough force to propel the kettlebell forward. If you squat, if you think about how the squat is designed, you're going down and back up. And then you have to take this bell in front of you and drive it through your hips and drive it forward. So it takes more time for you to drive up into hip extension to propel the kettlebell forward. Whereas if you hinge back with your hips, then you have more like a faster rate of force pushing the kettlebell forward. So every single person that I train, we learn how to hip hinge first. So something as simple as this guy here, a hip hinge. And there's so many different ways of doing a hinge, where in this case, this is an old video. I mean, look how terrible the quality is, where I'm utilizing the dowel to push into my glutes to engage my lats, because lat tension is going to be huge when I am swinging. And the bench that's right behind my calves is giving me kind of feedback if I am doing a true hinge. Because if I say push back and I lose contact with the bench here, I'm into a squat. So now this is a great teaching tool for me to, or for my client to learn how to properly hinge. Sometimes this doesn't work. And what I've done recently is a band resistant hinge, wherever it is. One moment, here we go. Okay, enough with the pop-ups. So this one I really like using. So I'll use a band, wrap it around a dowel, and now I have tension. So I have to keep tension in my lats. So when I grip the kettlebell, I'm trying to engage my lats to keep that stiffness. So I am now teaching my body how to create tension. I'm teaching my body how to break the dowel, which I'm going to utilize on the kettlebell. And I'm learning how to hinge. So how we do this, I literally get people to slide the dowel down as they push their hips back to kind of reinforce that pattern that we're going to utilize with the kettlebell. This is kind of like the first 4 weeks of training, is learning how to hinge, not how to squat, just hinge, and creating tension. So the other way that I will teach someone how to create tension for the swing is something called RKC plank. So RKC is an abbreviation for Russian Kettlebell Certification. And in this video, it'll look like a standard front plank, but there's going to be a few things that you'll notice is when I am engaging into this front plank, I'm actually driving my elbows to my toes and I'm pulling my toes into my elbows. So that's going to create in my kind of torso midsection like a high amount of tension. So when I do that, I also will reset, because holding tension like that constantly, you're going to like blow a blood vessel or can get a hernia or something. So as I do this, all I'm doing is elbows to toes, toes to elbows, and breathing out with they call it like a fire breath, like a hiss, like a tss, 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 tss. So even if you do that right now, just think of any kind of MMA or martial artist, every time they throw a punch or a kick, they have that hissing sound to create tension and produce the movement. So kettlebell training is exactly the same thing. You breathe in through your nose and then you hiss out the movement. So here I'm teaching someone how to utilize that breath. So as I come up and reset, you can see my mouth going through the breaths, and then I reset every single time, creating tension. You can even see how my elbows just drove in there. All right, so constantly these two things, the RKC front plank and the band resisted deadlift, is kind of like that 4-week phase one into kettlebell swings. From there, we've kind of built a foundation. Now we can move on to something a little bit more advanced, where we're going to do a kettlebell deadlift. If I can find, here we go. So putting the two things that we just learned is our tension and hip hinge. So as I get into my deadlift position and squeezing the handle to create that lat tension that we were learning with the band, I am utilizing my RKC breath, where I'm taking a big belly breath in and then exhaling hard at the top and squeezing my glutes at the top as well. So that would be one of the exercises in the next phase, is one, getting familiar with a kettlebell handle, because sometimes people are just used to utilizing dumbbells and this is the first time they've ever really played around with a kettlebell. So I'm going to introduce the bell this way. We're squeezing tight, we're having fun, we're moving forward. The other thing too, might take a second to find what I'm looking for. I have a lot of kettlebell videos. This is another reason why you guys should subscribe to my YouTube channel. Is like, if you're looking for a library of, actually, here we go. Episode 381 and 377 are my 2 episodes on kettlebell training, if you want anything specific on the benefits of it. So, looking for a specific video where we set up for, here we go, kettlebell snapbacks. So this will now kind of implement the position for learning how to swing. So we'll start off. So a lot of people, and this is another mistake, is a lot of people don't set up properly. They kind of just pick up the bell and they start swinging. And they kind of just like put the kettlebell in between their legs and they start like thrusting towards in front of them, and that's how they get started. But that doesn't make sense to me. Like, in order to make the swing make sense, to kind of start off with it a little bit in front of you, because the moment you drive it back for one rep, it already has the potential energy. So if you think of like an object in motion, it's that much easier to move, because most people, when they swing incorrectly and they just pick it up from a standing position and they start moving, it's kind of awkward in the beginning. So use like literally physics to make things easier for yourself. So in this case, we're going to start the kettlebell in front of us, and this is called like the 3-point position. And the first movement is snapping back the kettlebell to there, and then back, there and back, there and back. And I'm still utilizing my hinge position, and also utilizing my lat tension, my RKC breath. It's all coming into play here, and this becomes a quite challenging exercise if you do it right. And a little throwback to when I had my long hair. And also, I don't even have my full sleeve here. Yeah. Anyway, so this is kind of phase 2 into getting swings into play. So now we've created our foundation. Now we're kind of getting closer to how a swing should go. So we've already addressed 2 major mistakes that a lot of people do, is they squat and swing, and they start their swing standing, and they do a weird like hip thrusting thing before the bell actually starts swaying. Now, the next thing that I like to implement from there is something called the power swing. And we're going to look it up here, where we essentially do one perfect swing every single time. So, and then when we set it down. So same tripod position, swing, and then back down. Drive back, swing, and back down. A couple things that I want to note here, and I want to try to find the angle. Right there. So step 1, we're in that tripod or 3-point position. I drive it back. And also, here's another thing that I absolutely hate when people swing. Look at my head. My eyes are facing down towards the floor. A lot of times people crank their neck up. Here's the thing with our spine. Our neck is kind of, I like to use the analogy, kind of like the driver of the rest of our spine. So if our neck cranks up into extension, our lumbar spine likes to copy it. So a lot of times when people feel their low backs in swings, it's most likely because they're literally looking up into extension with their neck while they're in this down position, and then the low back is arched. And if you're swinging incorrectly, you're like stopping the momentum, and you have a extended lumbar spine, and that's not going to feel really good. So head is always neutral with the rest of their spine, just like deadlifting. If you're one of those people that are deadlifting with the neck up, then we have more issues to unravel. But as we come up, this angle is not the greatest. Hopefully we got a better view. Here we go. So the other thing here too, if you look at my mouth, I'm hissing out. A lot of people tend to forget to breathe properly. So if we start from the very beginning, we got a good hinge, we got tension building. head is neutral, and the snap is the big thing. A lot of times people, when they get to the top of their swing, they actually don't squeeze their glutes hard enough to drive their hips forward. Sometimes they leave their hips back and they don't fully extend. So if you want to generate force, that force has to come from somewhere, which is your glutes. Just like when you deadlift, it all comes from your glutes. Just like if you're sprinting, it all comes from your glutes. If you don't utilize proper hip extension, then things like overactive hamstrings and low back pain come into play. You never see, the fastest people on earth or the strongest people on the deadlift with small glutes. They're like huge, they're gigantic because they know how to generate a lot of force. So kettlebell training does the same thing. It teaches your glutes how to generate a lot of force. A lot of people get low back pain because they don't have the prerequisites in order to do this, and they need to develop basic lumbopelvic stability with utilizing their glutes in, say, a general glute bridge. So when I teach the kettlebell swing, I literally tell people you want to squeeze your ass as hard as fucking possible to generate enough force for this bell to go up. The other thing that most people don't get is the height of the kettlebell. Like, this is almost like probably the same level as like my rib cage, that like the beginning of my rib cage, almost to where like my belly button is. The kettlebell does not have to be up here, because a lot of times people will make another mistake where they think a kettlebell swing has some sort of front raise into it. No. The only reason why this bell is here is because of my glutes driving forward as hard as possible. So another kind of cue I give to people is, as you extend your hips and you squeeze your glutes, you also want to think of pulling your kneecaps to the ceiling. So now you have the backside of your hip like joints finish the movement, and then the musculature in front of your hip is coming together, and it creates that isometric contraction, that solid base, in order for you to properly swing this kettlebell. Now, the height that I have here is all, again, generated through my hips. And the other thing too is, if you can actually see, I have a slight bend in my elbows, which is a huge thing. Your elbows don't need to be locked out when you're doing a kettlebell swing. Why? When you start getting heavier weights, the last thing you want to do is have both of your elbows locked out, holding onto this weight, because when you get to that end position and then the weight starts coming down, all that tension is going to start going into your elbows, and people are going to start having, tendinopathies on their elbows, which is the last thing you want. Right? So always have a slight bend in your elbows. And the other thing too is, like, kettlebell training is about efficiency, right? So if I want to try to get, 30 swings in 45 seconds, if I have a longer lever and keep it there, it's going to take that much longer to go down and that much longer to get back up. If I have a shorter lever, now I can bring that kettlebell between my legs faster, coming back up. Now, after I have all those things put together, we're going to look at just a basic kettlebell swing. And I want to show you guys my setup, tension. So if you look at my hips, look at that snap. That's what most people really need to focus on, is that hip snap. Let's watch that again. And you can also look at my mouth. That was a terrible still shot of my, but I'm breathing out hard. And again, this is another example. Like my other video, I would say that one's kind of embarrassing of how high the bell went, and the lower the better. Like, it's an efficiency, right? So good bend in the elbows, good height, and now I can bring it back through my hips faster so I can get more swings in, right? It's all about work capacity. Now, that is kind of the entire, I would say, step-by-step approach to my kind of method behind kettlebell swings. Now, I'm going to stop that. Perfect. There's always little things that you need to add in. Everyone's going to be different, but if you kind of look back of everything that we just did, we learned how to hinge. We learned the difference between a squat and a hinge. We learned about tension. We learned about breath. And then we learned about the start position and implementing all the stuff that we learned in that start position. Then we took the time to slow down the swing to do one perfect rep every single time. And then we challenged it where we did continuous reps, right? It's kind of like any other skill. Like it takes some time to put everything together. So say we had to troubleshoot. Say we had some problems when we got to the power swing and you're not extending your hips forward, or you're not getting that snap like I mentioned. Hammering things like barbell hip thrusts, a ton of glute bridges, anything glute related that will teach the extension, like heavy deadlifts, like anything like that is going to help quite a bit. It can also be something as simple as like moving your feet a little bit wider, almost going into like a sumo stance could help. Maybe you have some sort of anatomy that is preventing you from getting into a traditional kind of kettlebell swing stance. And all you have to do is, go a little bit wider and voila, like your kettlebell swing looks great. But the biggest thing is that you need to be able to practice it over and over and over again. And that's why I have these kind of stages, so that by the time we get to a full swing, the prerequisites of learning how to hinge are already there and kind of like glued into your brain, that you know that when I grab this kettlebell, I'm hinging and I'm not going to squat and do something weird, right? And it's also about speed too. A lot of times people will do kettlebell swings slow, which makes no sense. It's a power exercise. You want to be explosive. And the other mistake that most people do is they pick up a kettlebell way too light. I see this especially with women. It's like they want to do kettlebell swings in their class and they go pick up an 8 kilo. Like that's not going to do anything for you. If I gave you a 16 kilo, which is 35 pounds, what's your initial reaction? Oh shit, this is heavy. I need to brace. I need to squeeze it tight. I got to make sure I don't, fuck myself over. So now you're already so much further ahead than picking up an 8 kilo where you're probably going to put it down like you don't care about it. And that's what's going to actually injure your low back, because it's going to buckle because you're going to go into flexion and load that pattern. So all these little things matter. And I think a lot of people kind of discredit kettlebell swings. They think it's like as easy as picking up a dumbbell and doing bicep curls. Like, no, it's a skill-based exercise that takes a lot of practice before you actually get the benefit. But when you actually take the time to learn how to do it, man, do you see results come a lot quicker than just doing a squat to front raise with an 8 kilo kettlebell. So I'm going to end it there because I feel like I can probably talk forever on kettlebell training and I'll end up rambling for like 3 hours. But thank you for listening or watching. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, do that right now. And even at the end of the video, it'll say subscribe. So 100% do that. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Add me on Facebook, add me on Instagram, hit the show notes of this episode to watch it if you're listening, and share this podcast with your friends and family. Until next time, you guys are amazing.